If you're like most gardeners, you've probably piled up grass clippings after mowing your lawn and expected them to turn into rich, dark soil. After all, they're organic matter, right? But weeks later, instead of fluffy compost or fertile humus, you're left with a smelly, slimy, half-rotten mess. So, why do grass clippings rarely break down into proper soil on their own? And more importantly, what's the one simple trick you can do to finally transform those clippings into the garden gold your plants will love? Let's break it down. First, it helps to understand what grass clippings are made of. Freshly cut grass is incredibly high in nitrogen, the green side of the composting equation. Nitrogen is fantastic because it fuels microbial activity and speeds up decomposition. However, the problem is balance. Composting relies on a proper ratio of greens like grass clippings and kitchen scraps, and browns like leaves, straw, or even shredded cardboard. When you pile grass clippings on their own, you create a nitrogen-heavy situation. Without enough carbon to balance it, the pile turns soggy, anaerobic, and honestly, pretty smelly. Instead of breaking down cleanly into compost, the clippings get matted together, exclude air, and rot in place. That's why your pile looks more like swamp muck than soil. The second issue is oxygen, or, the lack of it. Good compost is alive and it needs oxygen to thrive. When you dump clippings in a thick layer, they compress into a dense mat. This mat traps moisture but blocks air, essentially suffocating the beneficial microbes that are supposed to do the work of decomposition. Without air, the pile shifts into anaerobic decomposition, the same process that creates foul swamp gases. Not only does this smell terrible, but it also leads to nutrient loss, meaning the clippings don't actually feed your soil the way you hoped. Moisture balance is the third culprit. Grass clippings are already about 80% water, so when they're piled up without mixing, the excess moisture becomes another barrier to proper breakdown. Too much water and too little air is a perfect recipe for slime. Instead of becoming the crumbly, sweet-smelling compost you want, the clippings essentially ferment. So, what's the solution? The trick is surprisingly simple. Always pair your grass clippings with a carbon-rich brown material. Think of it as giving your clippings a partner in the compost dance. For every bucket of fresh grass, add an equal bucket of shredded leaves, straw, sawdust, or even torn-up cardboard. These browns absorb excess moisture, create air pockets, and provide the carbon that balances the nitrogen-rich clippings. This balance is the single most important step in turning grass into soil-building compost. Another easy fix is to avoid piling your clippings too thickly. Instead, layer them in thin sheets, no more than 2 inches deep, whether in your compost bin or directly as mulch. If you lay grass down in heavy mats, it compacts and smothers itself. But when you spread it thin and add browns between layers, the pile gets the oxygen it needs. This layering method turns what would have been, smelly slime into a hot, actively composting pile. Aeration also plays a big role. Just giving your compost pile a good turn once every week or two adds the oxygen that microbes love. It doesn't have to be complicated. A garden fork or even a stick works. With just a little effort, your clippings will break down in weeks instead of sitting there for months. If you'd rather skip the compost pile altogether, another trick is to use your grass clippings directly as mulch, but with a twist. Instead of dumping a thick layer on your garden bed, sprinkle the clippings lightly, then cover them with a carbon-rich mulch like wood chips or straw. The top layer prevents the clippings from getting slimy while still allowing them to decompose in place. Over time, they feed the soil directly, all while suppressing weeds and keeping moisture in the ground. Here's the bottom line. Grass clippings never become soil on their own because they're out of balance. They're too nitrogen-rich, too wet, and too dense to break down properly without help. But when you add carbon materials, keep layers thin, and make sure air can flow, they transform quickly into nutrient-rich compost or mulch. Instead of dreading the pile of clippings after mowing, you'll start seeing them as one of the easiest sources of free fertilizer your garden could ever ask for. So next time you mow, don't waste those clippings, and don't just dump them in a pile. Mix them, layer them, and aerate them, and watch how fast they transform into the dark, crumbly soil food your plants will thrive on. And if you found this tip helpful, make sure to hit the subscribe button, because I share natural gardening tricks like this every week that can save you money and make your garden more productive.